So welcome everyone. My name is John Dakin, and I'm a member of the American Ethical Union's Assembly Committee and a member of the Washington Ethical Society. I'm delighted to welcome you to tonight's workshop entitled Reclaiming the New Colossus. Among other things, a reflection on immigration in America. And I look forward as much as you all to hearing our presenter, uh, um, Scott Franciscus, deliver a presentation tonight, and there'll be plenty of time for us to reflect with one another and with the whole group. I want to make a personal note at the outset. Four of my great grandparents immigrated to this country from Sicily through Ellis Island, and undoubtedly gazed up at the Statue of Liberty. So I have some personal history that I bring to this as a participant, and many of you may also as well. So I invite you to take a look at the slide showing Scott's bio. He is a member of the Susquehanna Valley Ethical Society, and you can read a little bit more about him there. And he is on his own theological journey and planning to pursue becoming an ethical humanist chaplain, soon to be enrolling at Meadville Lombard Theological School. Scott, I invite you to say a few more words about yourself, and then please take it away.
Sure. Thanks, John, and thank you, everybody, for attending tonight. I was humbled to be able to have this workshop approved. As I shared with the team a little bit ago, as I looked down at the list of other presenters and other workshops, I was a little bit intimidated by some of the other people that I will be with, able to present with. And so I thank you for taking this time this evening to join me. As John mentioned, I will be entering Meadville Lombard this fall. I was an evangelical youth pastor for over 12 years. Coming out of college, I have an undergraduate in the Bible with looking at professional studies in youth ministry. But over this time, my faith and my views and my journey obviously has shifted in a different direction. And so I am grateful to have found the American Ethical Union and the Susquehanna Valley Ethical Society, as well as I continue on my path of learning and growing and kind of figuring out finally who I am. So that's a little bit about me. And a little bit then I'd like to share about what we're hoping to accomplish, or what I'm looking to accomplish tonight. So a couple goals for tonight. One is to give you your money's worth. So I know you guys paid a premium to be here, and I want to give you your money's worth of a show. And also I need to earn my speaking fee. So with that said, no, my real goal here is to hopefully prompt questions. I do not come here tonight looking to provide answers, which will make for a great Q&A session later, because it's going to be a bunch of questions. No, I kid. Hopefully there are some answers I can provide, but ultimately I'm looking to inspire questions that prompt us to relook at maybe our history, what we know, what we believed, what we have learned, maybe to unlearn some of those things and to relearn some new things. Also, my approach to this workshop is much like my approach to a workout. I join a gym and take lessons there, not to sit back and watch the trainer do all the work or the instructor, but to do the work myself. So looking at their guidance and trying to figure out how I can do some of that work as well. So part of the breakout sessions that we're going to do tonight is hopefully to encourage us to do some work, not only just tonight, but then to inspire us to continue the work moving forward. So with that said, why the new Colossus? Why did I want to look at this? Why is this the theme for tonight? But before I do that, John, if you could go to the next slide. I do think it's important that we recognize wherever we are that the land that we stand on was not and is not our land. So I come from Central PA, and I am residing in the traditional territory of the Susquehannock. And I believe as members of the ethical culture, it's important for us to remember that we offer respect to the original stewards of the lands upon which we gather now. In acknowledging Indigenous people, we take a first step on the long road toward humane reconciliation and developing a deeper understanding of where we are. It's important for us to remember there have always been Indigenous people in the spaces we call home, and there always will be. This is not our native land, and I think it's important for us, assuming you're not Indigenous, that we recognize the land that we are part of. And part of the first session of the breakout, I would encourage you to, if you can, to find out, if you don't know, the land that you stand on, and be able to share that with the people in your breakout group. Thanks, John. You can go ahead, go to the next slide, but don't start the video, please. So why the new Colossus? Why did I want to look at this? Perhaps some of you remember just a few years ago in 2019, when the previous administration was rolling out their immigration policy and trying to find support for their public charge rule that they were adding into their immigration policy. Ken Cuccinelli was being interviewed. And when he was asked about how the new public charge rule squares with the vision of America, specifically the plaque at the Statue of Liberty and the poem that I think we're all familiar with, at least parts of it, of, give us your tired and your poor, your huddled masses learning to breathe free. In response to that, Ken Cuccinelli said, he added, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses learning to breathe free, who can stand on their own 2 feet and who will not become a public charge. Obviously, that last line is not a part of the new Colossus. That is not what was written in Emma's poem. However, I think it's important to recognize that while unstated, I think that part of his answer has always been our immigration policy. I don't think we have actually ever lived up to the inspiration and aspiration of the new Colossus. So when I saw that the American Ethical Union was looking for workshop ideas based around addressing the whole truth about America, and is America all it should be, all it could be, and are we living up to our aspirations? It struck me that Ken Cuccinelli's answer actually is, in a way, correct, that is what we have actually aspired to and have been doing. But the question is, should it be? So with that said, I'd like to look at the new Colossus, have a brief history lesson, a little bit on it, and a little bit breakdown of the sonnet before our breakout session. So John, would you go ahead and play the video for us?
Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame,
with conquering limbs astride from land to land.
Here at our sea-washed sunset gates shall stand
a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning.
And her name, Mother of Exiles.
Mother of Exiles.
Mother of Exiles.
And her name, Mother of Exiles.
From her beacon hand
glows worldwide welcome.
Her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbor
that twin cities frame.
Keep ancient lands your storied pomp. Cries she with silent lips.
Give me your tired, your poor.
Give me your tired, your poor.
Your huddled masses yearning to breathe free.
Yearning to breathe free.
Yearning to breathe free.
The wretched refuse of your teeming shore.
Sunbeams, behold us.
Tempest tossed to me.
I lift my lamp beside the golden door.
I lift my lamp beside the golden door.
I've watched and listened to that quite a few times over the past month or so, and it still gives me chills hearing that recited by refugees and immigrants to this nation. My history with this poem, or my understanding of it, I think might be typical of a typical U.S. citizen. My thought, as I think back on it, was that that is what the Statue of Liberty is holding in her hands. I always thought that that poem was etched on those tablets. It's not, by the way. It's July 4th, 1776. But to me, I always thought that this poem was what the Statue of Liberty was all about. It was welcoming immigrants into our country. It was a beacon, a welcoming light. And I thought that was, in a way, the whole purpose of the Statue of Liberty. Little did I really know until I started delving into its history. So a little bit about the Statue of Liberty. It was not ever about immigration. The idea for the statue came out of an 1865 dinner party near a palace in Versailles. The guests, mostly intellectuals and artists, weren't fond of the current French government, a repressive regime headed by Emperor Napoleon III. They wanted to find some way to celebrate the liberal values important to them, values like individual rights and freedom of expression. To them, they saw this burgeoning nation of the Americas, the United States, as exemplifying those liberal values, and they wanted to honor that. They saw the abolition of slavery as a means and a reason to celebrate. Immigration was never a part of their reasoning for celebrating the United States. And I think that's important for us to keep that in the back of our mind. So the statue was commissioned. The artist had seen the vision of it in Egypt, and he saw some of the other statues that were guarding the tombs, and he wanted to create this monument, this statue, to celebrate the relationship between France and America. Where does the poem come from? Well, the poem comes from the need to raise funds for the pedestal that the statue would reside on. It was given to us by France, but they said they're not going to provide the pedestal. If you need to provide a place for it to stand on. The U.S. government did not want to fund that. New York did not want to fund it. So a guy named Pulitzer decided to raise funds. And in doing so, he commissioned some pieces of art or poems, literature, to be auctioned off. And Emma Lazarus was, sorry, the word slipping, was invited by a friend, and John, you can go to the next slide if you'd like, to write a poem to be auctioned off. Initially, she said, no, I do not write poetry on command. She was reminded, though, by her friend of the work that she did for Jewish immigrants and refugees from Russia. And in her being remembered of the work that she was doing, she decided that she would write this poem because she realized that immigrants to this nation, refugees, migrants, would see this statue, and she wanted to commemorate it and honor it and give her interpretation, I believe, of what this statue was to represent. It was written in 1883, is when she wrote it. The statue itself was dedicated in 1886. What's important in that dedication of the statue is that her poem was not read. It was not published. Nothing happened to this poem, even though she wrote it, even though it was auctioned off, even though it was used to raise funds for the pedestal. Nothing happened initially to it. There was no big recognition of her poem until 1903, when a friend then commissioned a plaque to be placed at the inner walls of the Statue of Liberty. And even then, it was kind of somewhat discarded. It was not necessarily put in a public place of importance. It was not there in the front, but rather kind of off to the side. And as it notes there of her bio, even Emma herself never really saw the fruition of her poetry, her work of this new Colossus, because she died of cancer in 1887. So the new Colossus, hopefully you might have all have a copy of it handy or a reference to it. I'd like to give a quick brief kind of high school literature class on it, and then we'll head into our breakout sessions where you can discuss kind of the impact it has on you or your thoughts on the new Colossus, and it's also on your screen. So the new Colossus is a sonnet. It has 14 lines broken up into an octave, which is 8 lines, and then a sestet, which is 6. And in the middle, usually around lines 8, 9, or 10, in a sonnet, there's what's called a volta, or a turn. Basically, what a sonnet does in the first 8 lines is pose an emotional or intellectual question, something to ponder. And then the remaining 6 lines gives a resolve or an answer. So as we look at this sonnet, we see that Emma is contrasting and comparing 2 Colossuses. She says, not like the giant, the brazen giant of Greek fame, which would be the Colossus of Rhodes, which was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. It was a commemoration of the Greek god Helios for Greece's victory over Cyprus. This was one of, if not possibly the greatest statues or giant statues of its time, the biggest statue there was. And she is comparing and contrasting this Greek Colossus to now this new Colossus. You'll notice that in the first 8 lines, the comparison is very inanimate. There is nothing really animated about this. It's very just nouns and adjectives, and it's very just stating what it is. Not like the brazen giant of the Greek fame with conquering limbs astride from land to land. Supposedly, the Colossus of Rhodes was so big, its both legs, 2 feet, were on 2 different islands that it to have it. And here at our sea-washed sunset gate shall stand. Now here's the contrast. A mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is imprisoned lightning in her name.
What's that?
Imprisoned lightning and her name. Mother of exiles, from the beacon hand, glows worldwide welcome. Her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbor that twin cities frame. You see this contrast between this giant past Greek fame of a conquering hero, of a warrior, of this man conquering. And we see it contrasted now with this woman with mild eyes, inviting, greeting the traveler, the immigrant. She's not a conqueror. She's not imposing as this great victory of war and conquest, but rather she is a mother. She's inviting her children in. She's inviting the nations to come in. And you see this turn then in the next stanza. Keep ancient lands your storied pomp, she cries. And you see now the statue is personified. She is now speaking. With silent lips, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses learning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore, send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. The resolution to the question, or the intellectual question of who this mother of exiles is that she's envisioning this land, this new nation, to be one that greets everybody in, not just the elite, not just the worthy, not just those that can contribute something to society in the sense of what they bring with their intellect and their work ethic, their pomp, their circumstance, their majesty. Rather, she's like, bring in everybody. Everybody is now welcomed. The ancient lands, they can keep their pomp. They can keep their meritocracy. We invite everybody in because of who they are, because of their value for being just themselves, for being human. I think nothing better that can really speak to who we are as an American ethical union that embraces humanism than celebrating the person for who they are, regardless of their status in life, regardless of their class, their worth. They're worthy because of who they are. And to me, that's what this poem is supposed to be speaking into. This is the aspiration that I believe Emma Lazarus wanted, but I'm not sure that we have ever really been able to achieve that or really want that. So in our first breakout session, what I'd like us to discuss is what is your relationship to this poem? What are your thoughts as you hear it? How have you remembered it? What is your story in connection with the new Colossus? Well, welcome back, everybody. I do hope your time in those breakout rooms were productive and had an opportunity to interact with everybody. We will have one more breakout time as well. And then after that, we will come back and have a Q&A and a little bit maybe more of a free association with everybody. So as I mentioned in the beginning, my past is as a youth pastor. And one of the things that my approach to looking at the Bible, when I would use that as a text to speak out of or to preach out of, was always to try to decide or figure out if the text was descriptive or prescriptive. And oftentimes I found, and looking back, especially within religion, there would be, you would get in trouble when something was taken either as descriptive, if you took something descriptive, but you took it to be prescriptive, or you took something that was meant to be prescriptive as descriptive. I bring this up because I think it's important for us to look at the new Colossus with that question in mind. Is this or was it meant to be descriptive? And that is actually what Lady Liberty stood for. Or was this Emma's opportunity to reimagine the Statue of Liberty and be prescriptive? I would suggest that Emma was looking to be prescriptive and that she attempted to flip the script on what the Statue of Liberty was meant to represent. As I said earlier, it was never about immigration from the beginning. And I think we could perhaps all agree that our nation struggles with the whole concept of immigration. We want to be that beacon. We say we're that beacon, but when reality, I think, comes push to shove, what we see is that we are very narrowly focused in who we actually want to enter into this nation. And I believe Emma was looking at this as an opportunity to create a discussion, a narrative of something that is much more prescriptive. And so in wanting to reclaim the new Colossus, I want to reclaim that notion of being prescriptive. And how can we transform our nation to be the ideal that is written in the new Colossus? There's two things I would like to then look at here in the next 10 minutes or so before our next breakout session. And this is some history that I did not realize happened around the Statue of Liberty and around this poem. So as I mentioned before, the statue was dedicated in 1886. This poem was not recited, it was not published, it was not mentioned. There was nothing regarding it at all spoken at this dedication. However, there were some things that were spoken and were said around this dedication and around the statue that I think is very important for us to understand and appreciate at it. There were quite a few objections and protests regarding the dedication of the statue. This is the Statue of Liberty. The idea was that it was supposed to celebrate the ideals of the abolishment of slavery, and it was supposed to show the ideals of liberty, personal freedom. And yet, I think we can all agree that that truly never happened. In 1882, we have the passing of the Immigration Act and the Chinese Exclusion Act. What's important about the Immigration Act of 1882 is it's really the first kind of immigration policy that's been set out. And in this policy, we have a head tax of 50 cents that was going to be charged to those people that were deemed not necessarily welcomed, to put it nicely. The people that actually this poem is inviting in, our nation decides those are the people that we need to tax. Obviously, with the idea that if they can't pay the tax, they can't get in. This is also the first time that there is a public charge doctrine instituted, and that people that were deemed that at some point might be seen as to rely on the public for assistance, that they would need a public charge, that they were now, it was now legal to say that they were not welcomed into our nation and even possibly deported. Again, the reason that I started looking into the new Colossus and it reminded me of this was because of the previous administration's decide to add a public charge to the immigration policy, and that they were going to exclude those people that they thought might become needing public assistance. So around the time of the dedication of a statue, we already see that there is a public charge being part of codified in the legal system. The Chinese Exclusion Act in 1886. In the spring, you have the Haymarket riots. If you're not familiar with them, I invite you to look them up. There was a lot of anti-immigration sentiment. The Haymarket riots was charged, immigrants were charged with throwing a bomb that killed police officers, in part because they were wanting to protest for the 8-hour work week. This is the true May Day or Labor Day that does not go celebrated in the United States, and its history is, I don't think, well known. But that is all what was going on around this time of the dedication. So there was a huge anti-immigration fervor within the United States at that time. At the dedication, the Cleveland Gazette, which was an African-American run newspaper with a circulation of 5,000, wrote this editorial on November 27th, 1886, a month after the statue opened to the public. Their front page was entitled, "Postponing Bartholomew's Statue Until There is Liberty for Colored as Well." Part of the editorial read, shove the statue, torch and all, into the ocean until the liberty of this country is such as to make possible for an inoffensive and industrious colored man in the South to earn a respectable living for himself and family without being Ku Kluxed, perhaps murdered, his daughter and wife outraged, and his property destroyed. The idea of the liberty of this country enlightening the world is ridiculous in the extreme. Also, the Chinese American writer Song Song Bu, forgive me if I did not pronounce that correctly, responded to the Pulitzer solicitation of funds for the statue's pedestal by sending this letter to the New York Sun. I consider it as an insult to us Chinese to call on us to contribute toward building in this land a pedestal for a Statue of Liberty. That statue represents liberty holding a torch which lights the passage of those of all nations who come into this country. But are the Chinese allowed to come? As for the Chinese are here, are they allowed to enjoy liberty as men of all other nationalities enjoy it? Are they allowed to go about everywhere free from the insults, abuse, assaults, wrongs, and injuries from which men of other nationalities are free? And also, there was a protest of the suffragettes who recognized the absurdity of a Statue of Liberty that is fashioned after a woman when women did not have the liberty to even vote. All of this is going on, and again, at the same time of this dedication. One other part of this, the Statue of Liberty for me, that as I think back, is growing up, I assumed that she was on Ellis Island. She is not on Ellis Island that welcomed the immigrants in. She is on Liberty Island, a totally different island. While close, it's not on the same island. In 1892, which was the inauguration of the Ellis Island immigration statue was opened, or the structure was opened. The Atlantic Monthly published this poem called "Unguarded Gates." Wide open and unguarded stand our gates, and through them presses a wild motley throng, men from the Volga and Tartar steppes, featureless figures of the Hun-Ho, Malayan, Celt, and Slav, flying the old world's poverty and scorn, these bringing with them unknown gods and rights, those tiger passions here to stretch their claws. In street and alley, what strained tongues are loud, accents of menace alien to our air, voices that once the Tower of Babel knew. O liberty, white goddess, is it well to leave thy gates unguarded? On thy breast fold sorrow's children, soothe the hurts of fate, lift the downtrodden, but with hand of steel, stay those who to thy sacred portals come to waste the gifts of freedom. Have a care lest from thy brow the clustered stars be torn and trampled in the dust. For so of old the thronging Goth and Vandal trampled Rome, and where the temples of Caesar stood, to lean wolf unmolested made her lair. So just about 10 years after, actually 6 years after the Statue of Liberty is dedicated, we have an opposing poem that is now published in the Atlantic Monthly, questioning that if our gates should actually be left unguarded and wide open of the quote unquote white goddess of liberty. Why bring all this up? Because if we're going to ask ourselves the question, is America as it should be, could be, and living up to its aspirations, sadly, on one hand, I'd have to say yes, that it is living up to the aspirations of what was the public discourse at the time. That Emma Lazarus's poem, which went unpublished and unread and hidden and forgotten for years until 1903. This was not the inspiration or aspiration of this nation. This is not what people wanted us to be. But I think it is important for us to reclaim it, because I think this could be and should be the aspiration. In fact, I believe if you asked many high school or middle school student, what is the American ethic? What is our call to this world? I believe they would say that our desire is to welcome the tired, the poor, the huddled masses learning to breathe free. Yet that is not who we have become. Lastly, I want to speak before we head out into the breakout sessions. One problem that I actually have with the questions that are being asked, and I don't mean to step on too many toes, and I'm not sure who fashioned our theme, but if we're going to address the whole truth about America, I think we need to look at that word, America. You see, we all know what we mean when we say America. We all recognize that we are speaking about white citizens. We realize that we are talking about citizens of the United States, of a more European background. But yet, America is not and should not only represent the United States, but rather America should represent what it truly is supposed to mean and what it truly is, and that is the continent. That is both North and South America, and Latin America, and Central America, and all the people included in these continent, not just specifically the United States of America. I understand that it's cumbersome to say anything else but American when somebody asks me where I'm from, or where I reside, or what citizen I am. Of course, it's easy for me to say that I am American. And in part, that is true. However, I also recognize that by saying that, I, for the most part, have centered the conversation on people that look like me. That it was not meant for the people that protested the inauguration of the Statue of Liberty. That they had every right and reason to protest that. That there truly wasn't the land of liberty. Sure, at that time, the slaves were set free, but we're also coming at a time of the Jim Crow South. We also see the failure of Reconstruction. We realize that it isn't about immigration. So if we are to address the whole truth about America, I think we also need to then address the colonization and the need for us to decolonize our vocabulary and our mindset. Yes, it might be cumbersome for me to say that I am a citizen of the United States, but that is a more appropriate term for me to say. It is more appropriate for somebody to say, well, where are you from? I'm from the United States, not that I'm from America. I need to recognize that there are a lot more people on this continent than me. I need to recognize the Mexican brothers and sisters, the Latino brothers and sisters. I need to recognize that my Canadian brothers and sisters are part of America, not just me. So as we move into this breakout session, the question that I try to always ask when I was a pastor and when I gave a presentation was, now what? Or so what? Great, we have this information, we have these questions, we have this pondering, but now what? So that's what I would like you guys to figure out. What do we do with this? What do we do with this new Colossus? Do we just leave it to be, hey, that's a great poem, it's on a plaque somewhere? Do we make this our aspiration? Do we desire to make this prescriptive? How do we decolonize our mindset, our vocabulary? How do we work at it? As we all are aware, in recent history and time and conversations in the political world, it's not enough for us just to be not racist. We need to be anti-racist. It's not enough for us just to say, yes, we recognize that the United States is just as much as the Colossus of Rhodes and not this new Colossus. But how do we become the new Colossus? How do we take that to be who we are? How do we even maybe get rid of language of where we're from, of citizenship, to recognize the citizenship of humanity, that we are all connected, without devaluating other cultures and other people, but recognizing that we are all together. So for the next 15 minutes or so, that's your topic. You can see it in the chat if you're there, and it'll be prompted into your breakout sessions. So enjoy the work in the next breakout session, and I look forward to seeing you back. Well, welcome back. Again, I want to thank you all for attending tonight and making this a part of your evening. So for the remainder of the time, there's about 15 minutes or so left. I just would like to leave it open. If we can make it a Q&A if you want, that's fine. You can share about some of your discussions in your breakout rooms, or just your overall discussion regarding the new Colossus. Any critique on the workshop, though, you can email me. No, I'm just kidding. No.
We have a survey.
Yeah, no surveys. I mean,
We have a survey.
if you want my Venmo and you want to tip me, great, but no. So we can just have an open discussion. Again, my goal and my desire was hopefully to raise questions and to inspire continual work, not necessarily provide answers and say this is what needs to be done. So yeah, I open it up to you guys. Oh, there is a feedback form.
There's a feedback form that you pull up at the end. You also
I created it.
I was not joking. There's definitely a real feedback form. And if everybody could just use their hand raise function, I think that we can go through. And Scott, if you wouldn't mind calling on people that way.
Yeah, sure. So what do I do?
I can do it.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and do it there?
You got it, Anna?
Sure. Nick.
Philadelphia.
Just unmute and then there you go.
I liked your original statement about prescriptive and descriptive, because I think I think the poem does suggest what we would like to aspire to. I think we would. I mean, we, not everyone, but we would like to aspire to. And we need to say that over and over again. We need to bring it to people's attention and try and respond to the reactions that are negative in that regard. So I think that's very powerful. I think the same with the Declaration of Independence and many other documents that I think we should take as aspirational rather than as descriptive. So I like that distinction you made.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's also hopefully I was able to communicate to I think some things that we need to unlearn, because I think there are things that we think it was descriptive of, or this is what people were wanting it to be, but the realization is our history was never that aspirational. And so I think you're right as well, that we need to make sure we remind people of in a sense the true history. Even now as legislators are passing laws and school boards are debating the 1619 project, and what's the crime of the 1619 project? Actually teaching history. Nobody's we're rewriting history in the sense that we're actually writing correct history. Yes. So fine. You want to say I'm a revisionist? Yes, I'm revising it back to what it should have been and what should have been taught ever since. So yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you for your comment, Nick. Betty, I see your hand there.
I want to make a comment on what you. I want to make a comment about what you just said. Sometimes a word sort of pushes one over the brim. I think that we ought to be recognizing that 1619 is not necessarily correct history. It's a more correct history. The process of developing an understanding of history is a continual process. And it's not that we want to take that text that has been taught to our children and throw it out for something that's correct now. We want to throw it out for something that's moving towards correct. You know, I don't have the proper word in English, but it's the issue of moving toward nirvana. Not getting there, but the process of moving in that direction. And so I think we have to be very careful to watch that sense of, I know the truth. I may know a closer truth than you know, but I'm not there.
Toward a more perfect union.
Toward a more perfect union. That's a very good, yeah.
Yeah, and one interesting thing about, if you want to compare and contrast, say, the Colossus of Rhodes and the Statue of Liberty, the Colossus of Rhodes, from the descriptions, it was not moving. It was a statue. Obviously, it was a statue, but it did not convey any movement. The Statue of Liberty does convey some movement. Her feet are moving. One is in front of the other. One sad thing, though, about the Statue of Liberty is that initially the design was that in one hand she would have the torch, and in the other hand she would have broken chains, signifying the abolishment of slavery. There are broken chains at the Statue of Liberty at her feet, and they're hardly noticeable. So even the idea of what the Statue of Liberty was truly to represent of the United States abolishing slavery, even that eventually in its final design was pushed all the way to the bottom and not very noticeable and recognizable, unless you're looking for it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, you wouldn't even know to look for it if you haven't been taught about it. Right. It hasn't been part of your upbringing and your information that you've been communicated with. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. And I that is, highly important is to constantly, I think also to question what we do think we know. I think that is the process of learning, is always a part of unlearning. There is a history that especially me as a white male, I have to unlearn. And I need to be willing to listen to other voices that can help me relearn, because this isn't just my history, it should be our history. Mine isn't the only narrative. Jan?
I just wondered, was the broken chains, was that modified because of protest, or was that just something that happened over the time of design of the statue?
If I remember correctly, in what I read, basically the design was modified. I'm not sure if there was necessarily any big protest to not have the chains, but I believe there was some reaction that maybe that doesn't need to be as highlighted in the way that it was first designed to be. But it's a good question. I could look back on that. Any other thoughts or any reactions just in general to the poem, not to my presentation at all about it, but just your thought? Oh, yeah, Bart.
Yeah, I just wanted to. I wasn't aware of all the protests that accompanied the what is it, what do they call that when they open this?
The dedication. The dedication.
I didn't realize they ever had all the protests for the dedication. Also, I didn't realize until tonight that the poem itself that people associate with this was really not present there, and not even thought of it. So it's very helpful to kind of hear how much constructed history we have here. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, John, go. You need to unmute yourself.
Yes, I noticed that Carolyn Parker has a note in the chat in reference to that question about the change.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, what does he say?
Carolyn?
So she writes, the chains in the hands were considered too divisive, so near to the end of the Civil War.
Mhm.
Thank you, Carolyn, for adding that. Nick?
When I first thought about this program, I thought you were going to deal with the absurdity of welcoming people to a home that we had occupied and push people out. So that was another theme that I thought might spin out of this, and certainly was true.
Yeah, very, very good point. I think to your point as well, that I mean that's part of our need to decolonize our mindset and to think about it from a different perspective, a different person's perspective as well. Yeah.
I was away for part of this session, so maybe I missed this, but it seems you keep talking about the poem not being there. It seems to me, at least the last time I was there, which was probably about sometime in the 70s, there was a plaque marking the words.
Correct. So the history of the poem, it was actually written in 1883. But in the dedication to the statue in 1886, there was absolutely no mention of the poem. It was not published. It was not recited. It was not spoken about. And it was not on display. It wasn't put on display until 1903, when a friend of Emma's commissioned herself or had commissioned a plaque be made to have the poem present. And if I'm not mistaken, it still doesn't have necessarily a huge prominence. But I think when we think of the Statue of Liberty, we think of that, at least that the ending line of, give me your tired, you're poor. And I think we attribute to the statue this idea that we are welcoming of the refugee and the migrants and the immigrants. Yet that was never the purpose of the Statue of Liberty in the first place. And hopefully I was able to convey, even historically, we truly really aren't that welcoming to the immigrant or to the refugee. Paula, you have your hand up.
Why don't we make this our last question?
So I really liked your prompt, Scott, for the discussion, which was, what do we do now with what we have learned about this topic? And really the topic is pretty broad. So it was really interesting. I like to think about doing more than just talk, because we're great at talking. We can sit here yak all day. But how does that show up in our lives? And we had some interesting ideas of what people are going to do to learn and to spread the word, so that, take a public stand in your society regarding immigration. Has ethical culture taken a public stand? The AEU, Bart? I don't know. Has the whole organization?
I know we've had statements. I'd have to look back and see exactly what we said in terms of resolutions. I'll be happy to do that.
Well, maybe that can be a nice send off to go out there and turn talk into deed. On behalf of the AU Assembly Committee, I wish to express great gratitude to Scott for your wonderful talk and shepherding this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
Please